evening, or I don't know, maybe some of you good afternoon, depending on what coast you may be on, but nevertheless, very happy to be here with everyone who is watching. And, I wanted to talk a little bit here specifically about the so-called bailout package, so-called relief package. I think Gloria already spoke to this. So many of these names, stimulus, whatever it is, somewhat of a misnomer. But whatever that package was that allegedly was supposed to be helping save us all under the virtue of, quote unquote, saving the economy. And, I think on that note, there's one maybe underlying view to look at this, one sort of just basic through line about this whole package. What it really is about at the end of the day is holding the line on the status quo of the economy. And when you think about that, what is the status quo? It's dominated by a handful of very rich people, a handful of very rich banks and corporations, and sort of the lower down you are on the totem pole, the worse you are treated, and the lesser amount of the wealth that is produced that you see, as it was famously said once, the accumulation of wealth at one pole is the accumulation of misery at the other. That's the status quo economy, and that's what this is really about, is the politicians, the political appointees of the ultra-rich are trying to make sure that the system they've set up for themselves, which quite frankly involves a lot of casino-style gambling that goes under the rubric of finance, that system stays afloat and doesn't collapse. Now, of course, they've built in some elements of this that are designed to, allegedly address the things that we rightfully need. And I think Gloria spoke to why the $1,200 check issue is, essentially it's full of holes. I mean, it may help some people, but the amount of money, the fact that it's one time only, I mean, there's so many different challenges in addition to, who gets it and how you have to file, that it's not enough. It's clearly not enough. I mean, just the fact that, the politicians themselves are now saying we need another package to do more. And one of the things they say they want to do is maybe some politicians send more checks. Some people are saying, let's not do anything at all. Who cares about the people? So either way, it's either not enough or nothing at all. So certainly that's there. I mean, the other big one that a lot of people are talking about is the expanded unemployment benefits that were part of the package, which essentially just means that every unemployment check will have $600 added to the weekly total over and above what else you would have gotten. Unemployment doesn't always cover 100% of your paycheck. So the goal is, and the reason they pick that number, they say, is that everyone who makes potentially as much as $75,000, although I've seen also something lower, $60,000, $50,000, $60,000, but somewhere between 50 and 75, people at that level get 100% of their paycheck vis-a-vis this unemployment check, but only for 4 months. And not only is it only for 4 months, but you're dealing with these unemployment systems that are provisioned by the states that are vastly underfunded, already underfunded. There's already issues about there being delays in unemployment. There normally are issues. Many of these states are totally overwhelmed. And then is there enough money in these trust funds? And is the money that's been appropriated by the Congress even enough when all of these claims come in? When you look at the amount, the 10 million in the past 2 weeks that have been unemployed. So, again, in 4 months, what happens? You're not back at work. All of a sudden, you're not making 100% of your paycheck. You're still in crisis. You're in a deeper crisis than you were before. Can you get it anyway? What happens? What's the delay? There's so many different issues. So again, you can see there, sure, there may be some relief for some people, but at the end of the day, it's at best a Band-Aid. And for many people, will still leave them in very tough, very dire circumstances, given, the depth of this economic crisis, and we don't know where the bottom is. Now, the other elements of what was in the bill essentially are the bailout, as we have appropriately deemed it. Many people here and are talking about it, whatever else it's called. I think at the end of the day, it's a bailout for the status quo of the system. And it has a few different parts to it. Some of them are more tied to what the sort of government proper, the Treasury Department especially, and also the Small Business Administration will be doing in terms of administering things. And then a second part that is mainly in the realm of the Federal Reserve, the central bank. So just to quickly break it down and go through it, and there's, obviously we're just scratching the surface here. And I encourage people to, always keep going to liberationnews.org, where we're always trying to provide as much analysis as we can. And we already have a very great FAQ, 5 basic things to know. But either way to go into it, the Treasury Department, there's the $500 billion that's loaned to corporations. Now, there's been a lot of talk about that. A lot of people saying, well, there's this condition, there's that condition. Democrats especially saying, well, we've put all these conditions, no share buybacks. They're not going to be able to give these golden parachutes to the the industries. Although, in the airline industry, they're saying, oh, well, we're holding the executive pay. They're not going to be able to raise it. Well, the average executive pay in the airline industry last year was $10 million to $15 million a year. So I don't really think they're going to be hurt. It's real tough there, capping that pay at last year's level. But nevertheless, even these basic things are essentially a moot point. I mean, not only did Trump essentially suggest this in a signing statement, but it's written into the bill itself that Mnuchin has wide latitude to forgive many of these different elements. So, whatever you may think will be happening, that could be potentially good. It may not happen. And then also they're just going to be picking and choosing who the money goes to. So ultimately the Trump administration now has $500 billion to give out to whoever under the guise of relief. Now, how that's going to play out and how it's going to work out, well, I don't know. If you think that it's going to work out 100% uncorrupt and save the economy, then, be that as it may. But I think we all know when you just look at how it's set up, how it'll end up. There's $350 billion as well for the Small Business Administration. And, on balance, this may be one of the best parts of what's in the bill. But, that's on balance. It's not a super high bar to clear, but it's $350 billion. And small businesses can borrow up to $10 million of a forgivable loan, so that the loan will be forgiven if the majority of that goes to your payroll and to things like rent. So it's basically you take out a loan to cover your expenses. But there's something like 30 million small businesses in America. Will $350 billion be enough? Who knows? The form is one of the easier forms the government has ever developed, so people certainly can fill it out, but it works with private banks. And it's a 0.5% interest rate or something like that, I believe it is. And so there may be many banks who say, well, I don't really want to lend to people because I'm not going to get that much money off of it. So, how much of this money will even get out the door and how's that going to be parceled out? All these things are unknown. So certainly, even in the best case scenario, it may not be enough in terms of the operation of the program. It may not be enough money. But in the worst case scenario, you may have money shortfalls and also issues with just appropriating it, which means that more people will get laid off. It's called the Paycheck Protection Program, because obviously the design is to get people to not fire people and businesses not to close. But you can see how quickly, bars, restaurants, hospitality, service. Many of these industries, are they coming back in 4 months? Who knows? So that's another question that's there as well. It shows for a lot of workers and a lot of small business people, the pain is still there regardless of the so-called relief bill. And, the last piece of it really is and there's some other money that's out there, I should note. They're putting more money in something called the Commodity Credit Corporation at the USDA and other money for agricultural loans, which many people, of course, know have a long history of going mainly to the big ranchers and corporate farmers, not, your average small farmer. But the other main chunk of the piece is the $454 billion that's pledged to leverage money or secure really the money that's being spent by the Federal Reserve in these various facilities, as they call them, that they're setting up to hand out money. Now, the media is talking a lot about there's $4.5 trillion is going to be leveraged by this. That's just sort of a basic textbook rule about how you leverage money, kind of a 10-to-1 ratio there. But the critical thing is that amount of money is not a set amount of money. We actually don't know how much money the Federal Reserve will spend in all these different facilities and exactly how this is all going to be played out and exactly how that $454 billion will be put to use. So, you might think it's $4 trillion. It could be even more. Some might say, oh, well, that means it's going to be less. But again, I think that's another one of these questions that do you bet they'll spend way more money giving out money to Wall Street and banks or way less money? So that is just an interesting aside about how we talk about how much money is being spent here. But there's really two elements to what the Federal Reserve is doing. And there's all these acronyms and all these other things that I won't get into. But it basically comes down to this. The first chunk of what they're doing is designed to keep credit flowing, to put as much money as they need into securing loans, buying assets, whatever it may be, in order to make sure that the daily machinations of the financial systems between banks and corporations keeps going and that all those people continue to get paid. Now, it can certainly be spun as, oh, well, this is the whole economy because Wall Street and banks have such a stranglehold on our economy. But we know how much the inequalities that flow through that system. So, just think about that when you think about this issue, that it will be spun as, oh, well, we must do this. We must save these institutions. But what are they doing now and how are they operating? But basically to facilitate the flow of credit, to facilitate the flow of business, to facilitate the flow of the status quo and the standing of the status quo, as I've been saying all along, of this unequal completely predatory economic system that we have. So holding the line there in the credit system, which is, the circulating blood of, this capitalist behemoth that's exploiting so many people. The second piece of it, and this is a lot less heralded, but it's very important at the Federal Reserve, is essentially just lending money to companies outright. And they've given themselves wide latitude to lend to companies, including in some cases, depending on the so-called quality of the debt. And these rules can always be changed too, so who knows, to more or less take on all of a company's liabilities in order to save them, which is interesting because it also means that they're expecting perhaps big profitable companies to collapse. So despite the fact the government's saying, oh, we're going to bounce back from this so quick, Mnuchin, oh, it's all going to be fine, don't worry about unemployment, the Federal Reserve is also setting up to potentially rescue the highest quality rated debt, which means the biggest, best run, most profitable companies that should never be in trouble. So that is obviously at odds with one another. But nevertheless, the Federal Reserve is being given broad latitude to do that as well. So basically to do something similar to what Mnuchin is doing with the $500 billion. So at the end of the day, it's a massive handout to corporations. It's being spun to people as essentially, well, we must do this because what if the economy goes down, quote unquote. But when we realize what's actually being done is the propping up of the economy that wasn't so good for working class people in the first place. And so is that really saving the economy, or is it saving the super rich who can't afford this system to go down and certainly can't afford for people to push for a change to this system and a transformed system coming out of this crisis, what I think is what we need to be talking about. Not a return to the status quo in an unequal economy, but really a transformed system that centers people over profits. So thank you.